I just put that out to a few folks who wanted to access the session. All right, we are recording this session for any of those who need to hear the session later. Okay, what we're going to be doing, Joanne is going to give us about a 15-minute presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, that will just kind of summarize some of the key points that we've asked her to do. After that time, we will then have a time for question and answers. And so as you're listening to this PowerPoint presentation, I would ask you to be thinking of any discussion questions that you'd be willing to help us think about when we go into our discussion time. After we've had a discussion time, then I will excuse everyone from the session except myself and Dr. Henry and Dr. Rogers. We are considered the voting members of the committee, if you will. And then once we finish our evaluation of the dissertation session, then I will bring others back on. And we've got the ability to kind of break people out of a session and bring them back into the session. And so I will do that here at the end once we completed our work. All right, let's see. So Joanne, let's go ahead and have you start on your PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll move from there.
Okay, I'd really like to introduce my PLC. I don't know if you all know them.
That would be great.
I have, yeah. First of all, let me say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I know we are on different time zones at the moment. So good evening to those of you who are in London, and good afternoon to those of you who are like myself here. And I guess good morning, Dr. Payne. My name is Joanne Rowland, and I am a candidate for Bakke Graduate University's Doctorate in Transformational Leadership, entrepreneurial track. And I'd like to introduce Ms. Lorraine Cohen. Lorraine is a social worker in London, and she's also a member of my congregation in London. My husband has disappeared from the video, but obviously I know he's around, and he has been extremely supportive in everything that I've done so far. He's even accompanied me to the Jamaica Overture last year in February. So for that, I'm extremely grateful. So thanks to everyone, and thanks to those of you from Bakke, Dr. Payne, Dr. Henry, Dr. Rogers, and all the other staff members who have contributed in some way or other towards my journey at BGU. So I want to say thank you very much. Thank you so much. So I will start my presentation now. And just to move my screen forward, which I am not able to do, can someone tell me what to do? Just 1 second. I think I've got it. Let me see. No, it's not sharing.
It's not working for you?
Okay, let's see.
Oh. Okay, yeah, maybe, and then go back into the full screen and see if you're able to do that.
Right. Let's see. Oh, there we go. It's here. So I'm going to share my research findings with you today on the regional Indo-Guyanese suicide phenomenon based on statistics for the period 2010-2016. But the overall findings really are in two parts. I've done some interviews with Indo-Guyanese suicide attempters and family member survivors, and then I took those findings to a consultation group, which provided feedback in terms of interventions and postventions, which we will look at later. I introduced my research by looking at some quotes from the World Health Organization about global suicide. So globally, close to 800,000 people die due to suicide every year, which is one person every 40 seconds. Many more attempt suicide, and there are indications that for each adult who died of suicide, there have been more than 20 who have attempted suicide. Suicide is a global phenomenon and is the second leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds globally. 78% of suicides occurred in low and middle income countries in 2015. However, Effective and evidence-based interventions can be implemented at population, subpopulation, and individual levels to prevent suicide and suicide attempts. One important bit of research work was done by Bertolotti and Fletchman, and what they're saying is that in 2020, there will be 1.53 million suicides globally. That's almost twice what exists today. Cause for concern. So now looking at my research context, which is the Indo-Guyanese suicide phenomena, I aim to identify factors leading to Indo-Guyanese suicides. I'm looking at a period which is 2010 to 2016. So I've got suicides and attempted suicides, and I've looked at those figures given to me by the Ministry of Public Health and the Guyana Police Force. Guyana has been the highest country for suicides in the years 2012 and 2014. Currently it lies at number 4, and that's behind Sri Lanka, Lithuania, and the Republic of Korea. Guyana has 29.0 per 100,000, and that is quite a high figure for any country to have. The highest suicide rates in Guyana were in the regions 2 through 6. You're looking at a chart there. The figures which are quite high up, they're the ones that are relating to regions 2 through 6. So those are the ones that I focused on throughout this research. Even with those high figures, underreporting is a major issue. It's not surprising that underreporting is a global phenomenon as well. Reason being that suicide is a stigma. And also in Guyana, not only is it a stigma, but it's also deserving of 2 years imprisonment. So people would do anything that is possible to not have a label of suicide attached to them. And they would even go as far as bribing healthcare providers. Let's look at some statistics which I've put together. Total suicides in Guyana versus the Indo-Guyanese suicides. You're seeing the total suicides in blue. So Indo-Guyanese suicides is more than 80% of the suicides in Guyana. Looking at Indo-Guyanese male suicide, for the total male suicides in Guyana, we're seeing again that Indo-Guyanese suicides are well up. Similar with the females. Female suicides are well up in Guyana compared to any other ethnic group. Comparing male suicides and female suicides for Indo-Guyanese, what we see there in blue is the Indo-Guyanese males, they are way much more than Indo-Guyanese female suicides. When we look at the total suicides versus the total attempts for Indo-Guyanese, what we see in blue are the actual attempts, but the suicides, the actual suicides, are way more in red. Now, because of this, I have posed a research question. I was posed with a research question as why is this phenomenon occurring? Especially where there is no contagion effect on other ethnic groups. To get answers, I undertook a phenomenological study which had 2 objectives. The first one was to uncover meaning from individual acts of suicide and attempted suicides committed by Indo-Guyanese within the Guyana's regions with the highest suicidality. I've mentioned before that's regions 2 to region 6. Secondly, I wanted to be able to develop strategies for suicide intervention and postvention to help to mitigate suicides. To address the issue, I did an inductive qualitative research. I wouldn't at this point talk so much about the literature. I will mention that a little later, but just to say a lot of reading was done to get me through to the findings. In looking at the sample population, There were 5 regions, and out of the 5 regions, I took 10. I had a sample size of 10, 5 attempters and 5 suicide, sorry, I beg your pardon, 5 family member survivors. So that was a total of 10 interviews. I recorded the interviews digitally and later transcribed them verbatim. Participants were assured of confidentiality and a non-judgmental environment. I used an interview instrument to guide the interviews only. My main aim was simply to get the participants to tell me their stories, how they perceived what they were going through that led to suicide or suicide attempts. In terms of research bias, I aim to reduce that by having 2 other persons look at my interview transcripts. And one was a Christian pastor, and the other was a high-ranking Hindu and member of parliament, member of the Guyanese parliament. My methodology was grounded theory. Part of my analysis of each interview was looking at it line by line, assessing what was going on for each participant, creating themes, creating categories, and just having labels in terms of what was going on in that particular interview, what I was finding. As I progressed through to the 10 interviews, I had to adjust my instrument slightly to cater for new themes or categories which were coming up. But by the time I got to the 10th interview, it was clear that a number of patterns had emerged from the data. Now, what did I find? I found that there were mainly two types of suicide: the premeditated suicide and the impulsive suicide. Planned suicide or premeditated suicide were often fatal. Those were the hangings, and we will talk about that. Spontaneous or impulsive suicides were often done out of anger, out of fear, out of harsh words being said to the person, and often they were alcohol related. Methods of suicide included hanging and access to poison drinking, pesticides, and in some cases, prescribed drugs. It was mainly the younger folks who were using the prescribed drugs, and they included things like Valium and paracetamol. Signs of suicide I discovered were self-harm. I had one person who did a lot of tattoos, as well as there was people cutting wrists, cutting veins, areas where they will bleed. Additional signs were isolation, where people were isolated from their family members, isolated from the communities. In addition, there was behavior change. So for example, if somebody decided they were going to commit suicide by hanging, they would, just before the period just before the time of the suicide, their behavior would change. They would present as somebody who was fun, who was more loving, who was kind, as opposed to somebody who was going through a lot of stress in a few days or months previously. Another sign of suicide is what I refer to as psychic. Psychic is not my word, it's a word defined by Schmemann as hurt, anguish, soreness, aching psychological pain in the psyche, in the mind. Essentially, psychic was unbearable psychological pain. Another outcome of my research was familiar challenges, and this was mostly stemming from dysfunctional families. Mothers were missing. Those who are aware, Indo-Guyanese mainly were patriarchal in structure, with the fathers more or less going out to work and the mothers staying at home to take care of the family. Now, mothers were going out to work more than usual, and youngsters were being left at home to come in from school and maybe take care of the roles that the mom would have normally done. There were a lot of abusive behaviors as a result of this tension, the change in the family structure and things that were going on. Parents were fighting against parents, parents against children, siblings with siblings. So there was lots of this upheaval within the family, and mostly caused by misunderstandings. In terms of my religious finding, I found that both Indo-Guyanese Hindus and Christians were committed suicide. Culturally, alcohol was a major problem. Alcohol it's a byproduct of the sugarcane production here in Guyana, and it's being sold very cheaply within the country. So people will get access and just simply abuse it. In addition, there was a stigma attached to suicide, which people had to bear. There was also poor socialization and coping skills, and I will talk about hopelessness in a moment. Mental health, a lot of my participants were showing evidence of depression, stress, and disempowerment. Let's look at hopelessness. Hopelessness was this incapacity to deal with a psychological pain. And this was evident throughout. There was so many people saying, I just cannot cope with this thing anymore. I cannot cope with what I'm going through. I had a situation with a family survivor telling me of the man who committed suicide in their family by hanging. He was being served an injunction against his wife. His wife was serving him an injunction so that he would not have been able to see his family members. He would not have been able to go into the home where he was the one who built that home. So there was lots of things which were happening in the lives of men that they were not willing to share. But disempowerment certainly was one of those things. More males were committing suicide as we looked at the statistics than females, but unfortunately, they were not willing to come forward. Drug and alcohol addiction was also a problem. In terms of family member survivors, there was lots of blaming. They blamed themselves for what had happened to their loved ones. There was lots of guilt. They had many unanswered questions. And a big situation for them was this whole crime element of suicide, having to spend 2 years in prison or have their loved ones spending 2 years in prison. There was a situation where, I'm going to come to that, I'm running ahead of myself. It is now. In one of the hospitals, what has happened is that hospital staff actually said to somebody who had attempted suicide that at the end of her treatment, she would be going to prison. So to prevent herself going to prison, that person took out all her treatment tubes and ended up committing suicide. So there was a need for more training for police, for hospital staff, also the pharmacies which were dispensing to minors, unsupervised minors. And the police in one instance asked one of the family member survivors for a telephone to make a call to take the body to a morgue because they did not have credits. So these are some of the challenges faced, and they were part of the outcome of my findings. Additionally, there was no family member survivor who was offered professional counseling, and other support did not exist. Very, very rarely, the social worker would become involved in the hospital. So that brings me to the strategies which were devised by the consultation group, which 11 stakeholders attended. Just bear with me. The things that they desired to see happen was that more men's forums would exist to provide a platform for men to share their challenges. There was a need for more professional counseling, including grief counseling and group therapy linked to referral system. So for example, if someone was in their counseling session, maybe a child that needed to be referred on to child protection, they would be able to do that. Community care groups should be able to provide community-based programs to provide immediate care for the families and victims of suicide. And also there was a need for recreation facilities to reduce the social isolation. Guyana needed to be educated in terms of the issues surrounding suicide and the loss from suicide. There also needed to be more education and training on coping strategies parenting skills, programs on how to value life, school-based programs in terms of building self-confidence through self-esteem, self-worth, and self-image being taught to youngsters. There must be all cases of suicide ideation reported, and suicide attempts must be reported. Additionally, depression, the underlying factors for depression must be treated and not depression just simply medicated. There is a need to find out what was going on for that person. It was important to improve the legal framework so that drugs will not be dispensed to minors. Also, there needs to be better management of pesticides and also some curb on the use of alcohol. Finally, there was a need for more responsible media reporting, because what was happening, the media was glamorizing suicide, going into full details as to what the suicide was about, how it happened, and everything like that. And there were a number of copycat syndromes going on. To finish off and to provide a better understanding of my research, I'm just going to provide some additional information regarding Guyana. Guyana is large geographically, 86,000 square miles, but it has less than 747,000 people. Indo-Guyanese is the largest ethnic group, followed by the Afro-Guyanese ethnic group. Indo-Guyanese are mostly Hindus, and most Hindus, unlike Christians, believe in reincarnation. My final project audience includes members of my PLC, my peer scholars, some Guyanese policymakers at the local, regional, and national levels, policymakers, including government officials, community leaders, and especially those from the Indo-Guyanese communities, public health and mental health officials, clinicians, child protection and suicide prevention agencies, religious and education leaders, social workers, and relevant NGOs, as well as counselors. In book form, my research findings will be available globally. I mentioned my literature research that I did earlier on in my presentation. I spent a period of 2 weeks in Cambridge University, and I did a lot of reading on suicides, both past and present research. Past research included work on Durkheim theory of suicide, Snyderman's work on psychic, Beck's model on suicide intent, Christian Miller's work on psychology of suicide. Recent research included work of 2 Guyanese, firstly Henry on the use of agrochemicals as a method of committed suicide, and Edwards, who did a deductive testing of Durkheim's theory on suicide. Other literature which I looked at included articles on stigma, grieving survivors, psychosocial risk factors of suicide, as well as grounded theory, which is my methodology. I also spoke with experts on suicide, including Dr. Donovan Thomas of Jamaica, who is doing sterling work in the Caribbean. Dr. Thomas and I plan to collaborate later this year to do a 10-day conference tour of Guyana, approaching schools and churches, and hopefully temples, to raise awareness of the suicide issue in Guyana. In terms of changes which took place as a result of my research, stakeholders of the consultation became aware of the Indo-Guyanese phenomenon and the causes of suicide. They were able to discuss possible interventions and preventions, which you're seeing, and also to interact with each other in terms of the suicide attempters and family member survivors, how they will be able to treat them when they do get in touch in those situations. After presenting my research findings, I was asked by a government official, an MP, to do a group therapy session with about 40 persons at risk of suicide in one of the 5 regions which I studied, and that was held at the Hindu temple. For the near future, I plan to attend a course entitled Assessment and Treatment of Suicide. The course will be presented in London by Dr. Ian Gallivant in March. In terms of lessons which I've learned, this study has taught me a number of things. which include more on the history of Indo-Guyanese, the psychology of suicide, that suicide is an outcome of many factors, yet it is an individual event. Indo-Guyanese Christians and Hindus commit suicide. People must find a platform to share their problems. The study has also shown me that in a nation which is divided by race, Afro-Guyanese versus Indo-Guyanese, when Christ is in the center, the process of healing, reconciliation, and shalom can begin. Life is valuable, and it is important that we help each other to sustain it, maybe by sharing another way of doing things. I have both personal and organizational interest in the suicide phenomenon. Firstly, I was born in Guyana, but I've lived in England for 45 years. However, I've returned to Guyana as a missionary with a heart to serve among Guyanese. As CEO of my Guyana-based organization, Ifratha, I have a passionate vision for empowering people to fulfill their purpose in life. At an organizational level, I want to collaborate with multi-sectoral agencies, essentially the research stakeholders, to help to mitigate suicide. I will finish with two scripture passages, which relate to hope and comfort. The first one is taken from Romans 5:1-5, which says, "Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have access by faith into this grace in which we stand. And we rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. Now hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts by the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us." Comfort in suffering is taken from 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, which says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort those who are in any trouble with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God." Our Hindu friends and people who we are in contact with, they are in need of somebody who will be able to share hope with them. And as Christians, we should be able to share that hope, as well as provide comfort. This ends my presentation, and I'm now open for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate very good presentation, and we just appreciate you bringing that all together in a nice summary form for us all. We do want to spend a little time now just thinking of some thoughts, questions that you'd like to put to Joanne, and she can attempt to answer those. Let me just put one question for me, Joanne, and I think you've done this pretty well, I think, but just for me, it would help to summarize again. Just try to summarize again the reason or reasons why the Indo-Guyanese suicide rate is higher as it's compared to others. I mean, you've gone over, I think, some religious issues. So if you just kind of verbalize that for me one more time, that would help me.
Okay. I'll just slip back to the research outcomes, which I've got here. I think mostly Indo-Guyanese are hurting. They're really hurting. And mostly the hurt is driven by some cultural issues because of the use of alcohol. And alcohol tended to create abusive relationships. In addition to that, family structures have changed. Whereas before the mothers used to be at home with the youngsters, they're now going out to work because of reduced finances. The men are out there working in the farms. They're mostly farmers in those regions 2 to 6. They're out there working, and what happens is that they drink a lot, and when they do come into the home, they are faced with a number of issues, which means that their patience and their temper is not stable. So there's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of infighting within the home, as well as with mothers fighting fathers and children fighting mothers. And there was one example of one child hitting out against his mother. So there were a number of issues going on in terms of family dysfunction. So family dysfunction, socio-cultural issues in the sense that they were not, they were isolated. There weren't very many recreational facilities so that children can go out and meet with their peers. And so that maybe when people have come in from the outside working long hours, there was no way apart from going to the bars to entertain themselves. Some of them even took some of them even took alcohol into the homes to imbibe. So it's a number of things, but there was also, I have shared one example of real abuse, sexual abuse within a family of a young girl who was being sexually abused by a family member. And she just could not cope. She just couldn't cope. And one of the challenges is that when they go through all of the pain, if there is nobody to speak to, what tends to happen is that they're going through all that on their own. So they tend to stay isolated, they stay in their rooms and they hurt themselves. And it's just really a very psychologically painful situation. Religious, when I started off, I thought perhaps, okay, it's a Hindu thing because Hindus believe in reincarnation, and maybe it's something that's coming out of that culture or that religion that is triggering this type of incidents of suicide. But I did find out that it's really a personal thing, it's an individual thing, because not only Hindus commit suicide, Christians, Indo-Guyanese Christians commit suicides also. Mm-hmm. But they just could not cope. It's the lack of coping skills.
Okay, good. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Like I said, it sounds like the family dysfunction is a big factor. And then, like you've just said, some of the isolation issues that just feed that whole environment for suicide. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, others, what would you like to talk about?
I mean, I don't want to labor the point in terms of the Indo-Guyanese suicide just being for men, but obviously suicide, it's international, it happens worldwide. Now, do you think that perhaps if it wasn't, and I have always thought that Guyana was part of the Caribbean, and you've highlighted obviously in there that it's not the Caribbean, it's one of the Americas. But do you think perhaps if it wasn't the Americas, if it wasn't so small, but perhaps one of the Western countries, there would be more work put into helping to eradicate it or to raise the profile more, or there to be more support in place for those who are going through the issues that you've highlighted in your work?
That's a very good question, Lorraine. I believe, as I said in a previous slide, it's an individual thing. Yes, employment is an issue. It's good to have good jobs and jobs where they're not working very long hours, like in some Western countries. However, there is still the need for people to share what's going on with them, and that is what was missing. They're going through the pain and they're keeping that pain, internalizing the pain, holding on to the pain. So there isn't a platform for them to share what is going on. Yes, you may give, somebody may have a good job, but at the end of the day, if you're coming into something that is not right in your home, if there's lots of dysfunction, regardless of whether you're in the Western country or if you're in the Caribbean or wherever you are, that is something you will be having to deal with. And if you have poor coping skills to deal with it, then it's a potential for suicide.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question. Does it?
And it kind of leads me to the question, I'm sorry.
It's okay, don't be sorry.
Obviously, you've highlighted that men haven't been receptive to the program when you've invited them on to say, you know, I want you to be a part of my research. They've been resistant or they've declined to be a part of it. So you've kind of touched on it earlier when you talked about you're going to be working with Mr. Thomas from Jamaica in terms of, as I was saying, maybe if we bring this into basic school, when we're teaching young boys and girls, it's okay to be open and it's okay to share things. Do you think that as they go through into, you know, preteen, adulthood, that basic school grounding would be actually, I can share and tell, which may reduce the high levels of suicide and may make them more open to discussion and sharing some of those feelings?
Okay, I think what I'm hearing you say is that if there was adequate training and more exposure to what was going on, then people would, the suicide rates would be decreased. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay, absolutely, I agree. I agree, because what is happening is that people here are aware that there is a problem. The suicide is a real problem. But because it's such a normal part of everyday life, it seems that enough focus and emphasis is not placed on it. So what needs to be done is that you have to start training people from a younger age to be aware of the value of life, for them to understand that you do not take your life. Life is precious, it's been given to you by God. You do not take it. So you work with them from an early age, and as they develop, hopefully those training, what you've taught them will remain with them, and they will treat each other with more respect. They will treat life with more respect.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Lorraine?
It does, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It does. Now, Joanne.
Yes, Lorraine.
You talked about, because I was thinking, obviously, the media is a massive platform internationally, worldwide. And what you didn't put in here, but you did mention in your presentation, is that suicide is more glamorized through the media reporting. Because I was initially thinking, okay, then why isn't there, is there a bit of a hidden culture, or are they trying to highlight the issues, but are they highlighting it incorrectly? Because I was thinking, okay, then there is a media platform. If they don't report it, will the gynaes then be, what's the word I'm looking for? Will they then say that they're trying to hide the problem if they're not reporting it? But are you saying that they're reporting it incorrectly and they're encouraging people to commit suicide as opposed to sensitive reporting?
Okay, that's twofold. They have been reporting suicide, and how they have been doing it has not been sensitive to what is going on. It's not been responsible. You can report something, but you have to be mindful of the effects of what the consequences are. And they were not. They want to bring everything out there for people to be aware of it, but there must be a format that you do it in such a way that you're not generating more problems. And that is what has been happening in the past. As a result of the way they've been reporting it, there's been lots of copycat suicides. And people have been doing things, and they're looking at methods which were used, and they were following it. So what the research intervention should be is to make sure that they're trained in terms of reporting, that they're most sensitive to what is reported. Yes, continue to report, but report in a more organized manner, a more structured manner.
Okay. Can you give a brief example of how they report there? How would they report?
How would, in the future, possibly in the future?
Yeah. Now, and how would you like to see it done in the future?
Okay, what is happening now Everything is out there. The way the person is hanging, sometimes even graphic pictures. In the future, get rid of the graphics.
Okay.
Just be more sensitive to what is being said, how it's being said. Yes, report, but wait until you are sure that that is a suicide before you put out the facts out there.
Okay.
Maybe in the form of statistics, that maybe on a regular basis, putting that out, but not, you know, if it's done on a daily basis, to be mindful of how it's done.
Okay.
Okay, let's keep going. Others would like to enter the discussion?
So, Joanne.
Yes, Dr. Rogers.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
As I've read it over and over again, you know, there were points of where this conversation and this research could have gone in a number of different directions. And so I applaud you for the discipline that you have displayed in the process.
Thank you.
And if I may, just for a moment, because I think that you're going to be talking a lot about your findings. The last question that was asked you regarding how you would see media and what you think would be appropriate reporting, I would suggest that you be careful with your suggestions, simply because I think that you haven't researched in that area yet far enough to discuss what should be. So as part of your discipline, as you share this, people will often will look at you as the area expert. In short, kind of stay in your lane.
Sure.
What you've reported is important. And so it's good to be able to just kind of say, you know, further research would be needed for me to make that suggestion.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing that I think it's important, you know, you've highlighted the fact that you have Christians and Muslims, Indo-Guyanese, and it would have been interesting to find out, because you have Christians and you have Hindus, it would have been interesting to find out exactly how regular in attendance were these folks, how attached to their religious values they were. Because often we know that people may have associations or affiliations, but they're not regular in attendance. And that would be an interesting aspect of, you know, further research. Just how attached are they to their, you know, religious values? Are they regular attendance to churches? Are they kind of just attached by name only, or, you know, the religion has kind of been passed on through one generation to the next, the religious values, or how attached they are to their religious values is a huge question that lingers. But that's what good research does. It brings out those kinds of questions that says, okay, you know, just how attached are these people to the religious faith? And so I think that's something for further consideration. Do you have anything that you might want to add to that part of it?
What I did try to find out from the person in Paho regarding this whole religious aspect of the suicide was that I was being pointed down a direction, because I was being told that Pentecostals, which are not, for example, Seventh-day Adventists, were not committing suicide. Seventh-day Adventists were not committing suicide, but all the Pentecostals were. So I had information based on conversations around that. But if I were to take it to the real Indo-Guyanese facet, I believe that, okay, I'm trying to desperately to stay in my lane. I intend to stay in my lane. That from what I found out, the Christians who were Indo-Guyanese, they were not what we will call long-term Christians. They weren't Christians for, you know, like generations and generations. They just got into Christianity over maybe the last few 5-10 years, say. So they were just learning. They were baby Christians.
Okay.
So the tendency to slip out into the world mode was there.
Okay.
Again, I haven't researched that part in detail,
Okay.
but I know there's a potential to look into that.
Okay.
And I really am interested in finding out why a particular kind of Pentecostal and not another.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Also want to validate your methodology. You follow the guidelines
Thank you.
of good qualitative research, being able to extract information through interviews and then having layers of interpretation being made along the way, so that you can, you know, basically you validated your work. And so I want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, very valid. The other aspect of this is kind of that piques my curiosity is you use the word, some of the individuals have demonstrated evidence of depression. Are you speaking from a clinical perspective, or are you speaking from just based on practical observations?
2 points. One, from what they've actually said to me, they were being treated for that, one. And secondly, as a counselor, having done tests, models, having given people models, I didn't use specific models in this, except I think it was Beck's, bear with me. I used it in my instrument two things to help me to get by. One was Beck's hopelessness scale, and the other was Knightman's psychological pain. And they have ways of determining if a person, the actual emotional, psychological state of the person. So I use that as a basis for my interview instrument in terms of what questions I sort of intuitively asked. I really wanted to get information from them more than anything else. But so that you're aware, my instrument was really guided by those two particular models. And as a counselor, I am aware that there are certain attitudes that are portrayed when there is depression. And there's certain things which are being said, and you know what when a person is depressed. But mostly these people have been receiving treatment for depression.
Okay. Okay. I think that's an important statement, a very important statement that that you want to make sure people are very clear about. That it's not just a observation, but it's based on clinical as well as a mature measuring instrument.
Yes.
Okay. Great. In relationship to the aspect of policies that is punitive towards suicide in Guyana, is this policy based on Christian value system?
In terms of policies, what would you mind explaining? Which ones in particular you're referring to? Are you referring to the penal code, the penalty, the legal penalty of 2 years, or
Yes.
the policies which are being?
I'm referring to current laws that are punitive to people who are attempters of suicide.
Okay, from my perspective, I would strongly believe that when they were originally formed, there must have been some guidance, some Christian guidance. I don't have the facts, so I don't know that. But I know it's based on Articles 801 and it's a Guyana law. It's a legal framework which is being followed, or which should have been followed.
Okay. What's interesting about the penal code is that, you know, it has some kind of value system in it, and it comes from something.
Yes.
And if there's any kind of future intervention that you're going to be moving towards as an advocate, it would be good to kind of understand where that foundation lies.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. And lastly, I promise this is my last.
That's okay.
I think that part of what I've heard and read over a period of time is that you're looking at some things that have intention, Western values, Christian values, and Eastern values. I really think that there's some tension there, wherein Western Christian values, suicide is absolutely condemned.
Yes.
And Eastern values, it is absolutely more accepting.
Yes.
And implicitly within your research, and it's very implicit, but again, another opportunity for some more in-depth research, you know, as you go along, is this implicit reality that our value systems are being, Western value systems are being overlaid into the Eastern, and we're looking at both combined in certain ways, these two realities. And in Guyana particularly, because it has such a concentration of Indo-Guyanese who are now being in some ways Westernized or have Western influences. I think that you're really at the precipice of seeing something that really could be a phenomenal opportunity to kind of look and compare. But
Yes.
but your work is implicitly giving us that sense that there's a cultural, religious underpinning to what's going on in Guyana particularly, and I think it's very fascinating.
Thank you.
That's my
Thank you. May I give you an example of something which may be helpful? Because there was a young lady who, she became a Christian, but she's living with her grandparents who are Hindus. So she's torn between following her Christian values and still at the same time trying to please her grandparents. Her parents had left her and gone their own way, but she was with her grandparents and she just wanted to please them, but having to have that tension and, you know, how do I follow my faith and yet be pleasing to them in their faith? So that was a tension, and that caused some suicidal behavior for her. So that was one of my participants. Yes, so I think I did mention that in the actual dissertation itself.
Yeah.
But yes, there is that kind of a cultural, the religious cultural element which is coming into it as well.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. So my comment wasn't necessarily a question. It was just a statement that this research really, you know, can open up so many different areas of discovery. But you've done just a great job again, staying disciplined and on track with
Thank you, sir.
what you're trying to do. And I congratulate you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There was one, Dr. Henry, I think when you and I were talking earlier, you were talking something about journalism and sensational. What was your question in that regard? You have to turn on your microphone. There you go.
Hello.
Dr. Henry, you're muted.
Hello. Hi, Joanne. Ian Waddle here.
Oh, greetings, Pastor Waddle.
I'm sorry for my late attendance, but it just wouldn't come through. Very interesting. I just wonder in relation to the tension in the culture. I notice you quote a gentleman, Hukam Chand, and whatever the other gentleman's name is, that the Hindus keep their old religion, including the marriage patterns from India, but when it comes to money, position, education, and social ranking, etc., they embrace the new culture. Would that be a contributing factor, do you think?
Yes, it's quite possible. Even though this acculturization process has happened, we're quite a way down in terms of generations. That has still been a factor because money and land, they're big issues for Indo-Guyanese here at the moment. So yes, indeed, to answer your question, certainly some of that would be a contributing factor. But in terms of my research, in terms of money, what I can say is that, you know, when I talked about the family dysfunctions, where the mothers had to go out to work because there wasn't enough money coming in, that can be aligned with it because they probably have an idea of how much was needed to maintain a family. And when there wasn't enough of it, then there was some chaos, but or some upheaval. So in terms of money, certainly, yes, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, not so much the income for the economy, but I meant more so for the, shall we put, the polarizing of their old life to the new life. Did they feel as if there was a betraying of the old system when they're partially embracing the new system?
Yeah, one of the things, and I need to mention, is that the Indo-Guyanese came years ago. I mean, we're talking about 150 years ago. But what I'm looking at is what's happening to them now. My focus in what is happening to them now. Maybe a culturalization is taking place, but for now, where they are, the money issue, the financial issue, is driven by the men not working maybe for enough to cover the household needs. Yes, maybe they're westernized in some ways in terms of children wanting more than, you know, they would have wanted some years back. But in the sense of the actual interviews which I've done, no one has actually said that my parent didn't give this to me and that's why I've done this. But there were certainly issues in terms of money. Does that answer your question, Pastor Waddle?
Yes, the other little thing, to come back to the copycat thing, I noticed in your dissertation, we had a situation in Coatbridge, a town not far from here, where the police actually asked the newspapers and media not to report. They had a spate of suicides about 4 or 5 years ago, where other people were actually copying, not related. And I find it interesting that it was obviously people who were related in your report, because obviously the grief effect, or the contagion of grief, you call it. But here we were having it, just people were committing suicide who were totally unrelated and were throwing people off tall buildings and things. So they actually asked the newspapers, and they were actually very good about it. They actually stopped reporting the second and third event.
Yes, that's a very good point. What my research has found is that when someone is vulnerable and has suicide ideation, then there's a higher tendency for them to commit suicide, to have a suicidal behavior pattern. Yes. Yeah, and they don't necessarily have to be related. They're just anyone, once they've seen something in the media, they probably feel that they can relate to that because that person was made out to be as vulnerable as they were. And, you know, the copycat syndrome will take over then.
Just finally then, just to take up what Dr. Rodney Rogers was saying, do you feel that there's a need for a change in the legislation then that might release the stress factor of suicide being illegal?
No, as a Christian, I believe the fact that suicide has a penalty to it is a valid one, and that's from my point of view. I believe that God has given us life, and He's given us not for us to take it. That He is the sovereign God, and He's the one who gives and He takes. So I think that having the penalty for suicide, I know Dr. Rogers mentioned it's coming from a Christian basis. I think that's important. It may do, but the bottom line of it is that the law is there for a reason. And removing it will probably generate more problems than already exist. But that's something for future research. I think, you know, it's a case where if we say that take away the crime element of suicide, allow people to commit it and then deal with it, that for me that would be wrong. I believe if you maintain the legal framework of the penalty, the punitive side, but instead put structures in place that would prevent suicide from happening. All the things that we discussed in the interventions and postventions, you know, getting, for example, starting with school-based programs, starting to look at kids and see, you know, in terms of confidence, building their confidence there and giving them an understanding of life is valuable, and you don't just, you know, get into a place where you get rid of it when you can't cope with it.
No, but it's just what you said about the young girl in hospital who had attempted suicide, and she was getting better. Then the nurse said to her, once you're released from here, you'll be going to prison. And I just wondered if that then, should I say, tipped the balance against her rational thinking.
I think it may have done, but then this is where it calls for more training for suicide, for hospital staff and all the other first responders, everybody who will have to deal with those suicide attempters or the ones who have gone into hospital as potential completers. Yes.
It's certainly opening a Pandora's box, really. I have nothing else at the moment, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Waddle.
I think, personally, it's, when I read it was a criminal offence, and then obviously following in from what Pastor Ian is saying, I think I disagree to you in part, Joanne, in saying that it should remain in place. It reminds me somewhat of the US penal system, where in some states they have your 3-strike rule. And basically, you know, when you've committed your 3rd offence, you can be serving a very lengthy prison. That targets some of the most vulnerable people in society. So your homeless people, your people with addiction issues, your people with mental health issues. So instead of, you know, giving an imprisonment, there should be alternatives, which should be including therapies, counselling and other alternatives, as opposed to a prison sentence. Because again, what you're doing is you are penalising those people who actually may have a father who is abusive, maybe one of those children who are self-harming or is a victim of sexual abuse. So why telling me you're going to send me to prison? How is that going to help me if I'm thinking about committing suicide? That's actually not helping me. So I don't, that's one of the things, as I said, I disagree with, and I think having a custodial sentence for vulnerable people over something like this, again, it's not a deterrent, but basically it's further criminalising people who actually are crying out for help, as opposed to giving them support and guidance.
Okay, that's a good point. So what we're saying there is, coming back to what I said originally, is that the law is there for a reason, and still at the same time, we have to make sure that there are all of these strategies and postventions put into place to bar it, to stop suicide from happening. So that's something that can be worked on in the future. That's something, as I've got on the strategy slide, improving the legal framework. How do we, it could be included in that, how that should be a part of looking into the criminal offense of suicide.
Okay, this is, we're going to probably run out of time here. Yeah, that would be an interesting issue to research. I know in the United States, Canada, the UK, and others, suicide is not illegal. Okay, and so it'd be interesting just to compare, some of those stats, how they compare. We're going to probably move into another segment here, unless there's somebody else who really wants to put forth a comment or a question.
Dr. Payne, I'd like to raise a comment and ask for some more reporting. I want to first commend Joanne for the quality of work that she's done. This is an important study in terms of what it would mean, not only for Guyana, but for the rest of the Caribbean, as it seeks to address the issue of suicide. I'm glad that you were able to make contact with Dr. Thomas regarding his work in Jamaica. And of course, the situation in Jamaica is somewhat different to that in Guyana in terms of the fact that Jamaica doesn't have a suicide epidemic, but there is suicide. I'd like to raise the question in terms of the result of the intervention, because this research falls under the umbrella of transformation. And first of all, I'd like to ask for your definition of transformation, and then I'd like you to explain to us the transformational outcome of your research.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Henry. I see transformation as defined as change. Anything that would move from an object from one position to another position, in this case, moving from suicide to non-suicide, that would be transformation. So the process of moving it, the change, the transition, that for me would be transformation. I see having intervention strategies which can enable those changes to take place, so that when, instead of somebody saying my first option is suicide, they have an option that says, no, maybe there is something else. So that for me is transformation. And I believe that my research is, especially the consultative process, is allowing that to happen. What we found out, the feedback from the consultation, is allowing that, because it's saying if we were to do the counseling, we can start to work on people whose the whole psychological pain structure is very high. We can start to think of how we can reduce that. We can look at, for example, where there's a lot of drinking of alcohol, which it may be cultural, but maybe we can look and see what are the benefits of alcohol in a nation like Guyana, at the level that it's being used. We can look and see how that reducing it can make a difference. So there are a number of interventions, postventions, which the study is putting forward that would enable change to occur. And I hope that answers what you're saying, because for me, intervention is going in, seeing what is happening, and seeing what can be done at a certain point in that process to bring change.
Okay,
or to stop that thing from happening. Sorry, Dr. Henry.
My follow-up question would be, what have you, through this research, put in place or proposed to put in place to ensure that the interventions take place? How would you ensure that the recommended interventions?
Part of what we have planned is that 10-day tour with Dr. Thomas to actually go around and raise awareness. And instead, the process has already started, because part of my presentation, we talked about the 40 people who I had to do a group session with. in one of the regions. So I was able to listen to what was going on for them and to help them to see different ways of managing their problems or coping with whatever they were going on, what they were experiencing. Additionally, and this is not something that I've actually presented, but I've had doctors calling me up, one doctor in particular, because she's aware of the suicide research which I've done. She's been ringing me up to just say, well, they have different people in the hospitals, and just to get ideas from me. But one of my questions to her is this. Most of the persons who died from suicide drank a pesticide called gramoxone. Now, gramoxone is fairly lethal. It's pretty lethal, to be honest. And I was asking her, is there an antidote for this? So she had to go away and start to explore and research whether there is a potential for an antidote for this particular pesticide. So these are the things that have already started to happen, because if a lot of people are coming in having taken gramoxone, then we need to know, well, there's something there that will block the death of that person. So these things have started to be looked at. And I really do hope that answers your question.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Does it answer your question?
Partly.
Please tell me the other part, which I missed.
I guess what comes out of this is, as Dr. Rogers mentioned, this study should spawn other research, right?
Absolutely.
And I would think that one of the ways to ensure that the proposed interventions happen would be to, and I'm not saying this would be your responsibility, because I think this has to be a community effort, but that, and I know the government of Guyana has put in place a suicide prevention team, task force, and it would be organizations such as those that would have to take what you have done and run with it if the interventions are to be meaningful. In other words, it would have to be that there are subgroups within the society that commit to working together and working at community level, and perhaps in the context of the church, at ministry level, to put in place the kind of cultural, social issues that would help to address and alleviate this high occurrence of suicide among the East Indian population.
I agree.
So it's not
Absolutely.
a responsibility of just any one person.
No, I totally agree.
A social community effort.
Yes, and that came out clearly in the intervention. It has to be a community care group hosting, or a number of community care groups hosting these community-based programs. Oh yes, absolutely. I am in 100% of the interventions and postventions which were generated by the stakeholders. And this is only some of them which I was able to put on for the presentation. Yes, but I'm very aware also that it's the future, something that will happen in the future for research. Thank you, Dr. Henry.
You're welcome.
Okay. Let me just ask one final question here, Joanne. In my pastoral training, I had to do a lot of work in the area of suicide because I was in a hospital as part of my internship. Of course, we all had to take our turn at being on the suicide phones, which were overnight shifts. What we did there, the phone number got publicized in a lot of different places, newspapers, TV, radio. We did all we could in order to get a phone number out to the public. And I'm not sure what actually is going on in your area in terms of hospitals, churches that are possibly, trying to sponsor suicide prevention hotlines, etc. Do you know anything of what's going on in the area? I'm always just looking for the practical kinds of ways that we can, make contact with the public to give them a resource when someone is desperate to call a phone number, etc. Do you know what's going on in your area, for example, with that kind of?
Yes, absolutely, I do. Recently, and thank you for that question, Dr. Payne. Recently, it's been reported that a particular group, I don't want to put the name out here, but a particular NGO is actually seeking from the government to have a helpline for people who are committing suicide. And they have been, apparently they've been lobbying for it for quite some time. And the government, I don't know, they're not funded for some reason, it's not being funded. So what the government, one government minister said is that if that NGO can go ahead and liaise with maybe telecommunications agencies, they can put that in place. And he will be happy to support it, but they don't have the funding to fund it at this time. But yes, there is a potential for suicide prevention or suicide hotline coming up in the near future. Good. And I totally agree that it's needed, it's absolutely needed.
Right, yeah. I think, as I think of, our projects at BGU, and I think as Dr. Henry just mentioned, we're always looking for ways that we can bring about very practical, change, transformation. And of course, it takes people who will just continually be intentional about helping, yes, governments, agencies begin to move forward. And so that may be a role that you'll play in the future of just trying to be a motivator, always a continual intentional motivator to help agencies and other government groups keep moving forward with those kinds of preventative strategies.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. I think we're at this point, we're going to move into an evaluation session. And what I'll need to do, I'm going to take everybody out of the session except Dr. Henry, Dr. Rogers, and myself. We are the voting committee, and we need to meet in private. What I will be doing is breaking everyone else out of the session. If you'd like to come back into the session, for the results, you can do that, or you can just sign off at this point in time. What you'd like to do, Joanne, for sure, I'll break you out of the session. Your screen will go blank. It'll say something. I'll bring you back into the section probably in about 15 or 20 minutes. And so you can kind of watch your screen to see when you come back on active, okay?
Okay,
and
yes, I will do.
And others would like to join, do that same thing, that will be the case. Again, if you just like, anybody wants to just sign off, that would be fine at this point in time. And, and Joanne can tell you the results later, but that's what I'm going to do at this point. So I'll be just brief then. All right, what we're going to do is bring Joanne back into the session. If there's anybody else that stayed on, I'll bring them into the session too. So hold on a second here. Let's see who's still here with us. Okay, 5 people are on hold. Just a minute. Okay, I'm going to take Joanne off hold. She should be joining.
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here.
Okay.
And I took Lorraine off hold. And I'll take whoever this person off is off. Okay, and Michael Rowland off hold.
He's coming.
Okay, everybody should be back in the session who stayed online with us. Okay. Rodney, since you're her supervisor, I think I'm going to let you make the announcement of what our final evaluation outcome is.
Okay, Joanne, I think the group has unanimously agreed that you've done some very excellent work here,
Thank you.
and we're encouraged by your scholarship. There are some things that we're going to recommend to strengthen what you've done, and those aspects of working with Dr. Thomas to be added as a reference point. Also, what was this? I'm sorry, what was the second item?
I think we had 3 items we actually were going to ask Joanne to add. Number 1 was to add in your chapter 7 that you will be doing the 10-day tour with Dr. Thomas. That's just a very good practical outcome of the project.
Yes.
Number 2, we did want you to add Dr. Thomas's dissertation work or whatever the published work is to your literature review chapter.
Okay.
Since it sounds like a very important work, it should just be shown to your reader that that was, you know, a significant work in the particular area, especially Jamaica area and whatever's going. And then number 3, if you just think of any other action steps for the future, just make sure those are in your chapter 7. I think you put 1 or 2 recommendations, but if you have any other specific action steps that you know that you will be doing for the future to bring about, you know, concrete, practical things that will be happening, put those in chapter 7 at the end.
I will do.
Okay, go ahead, Rodney, you can go ahead.
Yeah, very good. And so with those recommendations, this committee has recommended that you receive a passing with distinction.
Yes, indeed.
Congratulations.
Yes, we certainly do congratulate you, Joanne.
And that face didn't tell me that. Your face didn't say that at all. Oh, thank you.
I'm practicing seriousness. I'm a pastor.
That face was like, what? Oh my gosh, it was so bland. Dr. Rogers, you did that very well. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Oh,
Congratulations.
oh thank
Yes,
you.
we
You're making
really-
me emotional now. Thank you
I know.
so much.
Yes, we really
Thank
do.
you so much.
We congratulate you, Joanne. You did a fantastic work, just very, very good research work. And, you know, when you have people like Dr. Henry and Dr. Rogers who
Yes.
really give you high marks on your research, and they are both great researchers, you've done a fantastic job. So good, thank you.
I really do appreciate it. I don't have a speech or anything like that, but just to say thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But please don't put me through that again. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. What happens now? What happens now?
So we will send in our recommendations to Judy, and just finish off those other pieces. The technical reader is continuing their work.
Yeah.
They've already made mention of the work that needs to happen, and at the end of the day, you're pretty much done. You know, just those few things that we want you to put in. At that point, you know, I've already approved it. You don't need to send it back to me. Bill, Dr. Payne needs to see it and give his final, you know, yes to it, and we're good. We're done.
Thank you so much. Oh, wow. Okay. Can I have a copy of this so that I can make sure everything that was spoken of is included? Thank you so much.
I will send
well,
I will
okay.
send you a summary of that, Joanne, so you have those 3 points, you know, so that
Thank
you'll
you,
have
Dr.
that.
Payne.
That would be good. Yeah, I will mention,
Thank
yeah,
you.
you've got the, I think you've got the copy from the technical reader and from myself. I kind
I
of work with
did.
the technical reader. And then, like I told you, don't be shocked just because of all the comments that end up on a technical review sheet, because that's typical, okay?
Yes.
But you'll get that,
It's okay.
you'll respond to all those recommendations, make those revisions. Yeah, you will then send that
Okay.
document back to me. You also do need to send that back to Dr. Rogers, because the supervisor does have to give formal approval of the final dissertation draft before we send that back to Dr. Judy Melton, who will then proceed
that's
forward
fine.
with, you know, other issues. Yeah, we have an evaluation form that we've filled out. pass with distinction designation. We will each sign that, and then we'll send that off to Judy also, just for your student record. Other than
Thank
that,
you so much.
you've reached the finish line.
Yes.
Thank you. That's brilliant.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Henry. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the work that you've done too.
You're
Oh,
welcome.
oh,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay.
I will send you each an email. Thank you so much.
All right.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
God bless you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
God bless
Lorraine,
all of you, and Lorraine and Michael and others that got to join us today. Thank you so much for
Pastor
spending some time with us. And congratulations, and God bless the future efforts, Joanne, that you're going to be doing there in the area.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay,
Goodbye.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.